If you've ever been told you weren't good enough by someone who never bothered to look, then this story is going to hit you harder than you expect. On a Monday morning in March, a man in a three-piece suit stood in the doorway of a group home for teenage girls and told the woman who ran it that she had 7 days to prove the home was worth keeping open. He had a clipboard. He had authority. He had already made up his mind. But on the third day, something happened in that house that made him set down the clipboard, sit on the floor, and weep in front of 6 teenage girls and a woman he had come to shut down. And when he finally stood up, he was not the same man who walked in. Good to have you here, friends. Please like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Tell us where you're joining from in the comments. Atlanta, London, maybe Ghana or Barbados? We're curious. Now pay attention to what happens next. Because this story is about a woman who was given 7 days to save everything she loved. And instead of begging, instead of arguing, instead of fighting with words, she did something so simple and so powerful that it didn't just save the house. It saved the man who came to tear it down. Her name was Ruth Achebe. She was 57 years old, a compact woman with broad hips and strong forearms, and a face that looked like it had been carved by someone who believed in kindness, soft around the eyes, firm around the mouth, open in a way that made people tell her things they hadn't told anyone else. She had deep brown skin that glowed copper in afternoon light, a thin scar along her jawline from a dog bite she got when she was 11, and silver hair she kept cut close to her scalp because she said long hair was for women who had time to sit down, and Ruth Achebe had not sat down in 30 years. She wore flat shoes, always. She wore cotton dresses with big pockets, always. In those pockets, she kept a small notebook, a pen, a wrapped peppermint, and a folded photograph of her late husband, George, standing in front of the house the day they bought it. George had his arm in the air like he was waving at someone behind the camera, but he wasn't waving at anyone. He was reaching for the sky. Ruth said he always reached for things he couldn't touch. She said that was why she loved him. George Achebe died 8 years ago. Stroke. Fast. He was 51. He was making breakfast, scrambled eggs and sausage, and he dropped the spatula and then he dropped. Ruth caught him before he hit the floor. She held him on the linoleum while the eggs burned and the smoke alarm screamed and the paramedics came and the world split in half. She never fixed the burn mark on the ceiling above the stove. She said it was the last thing George ever cooked and she would not erase it. After George died, Ruth did something unexpected. Their house on Sycamore Lane was a large Victorian with 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a wraparound porch, and a basement that George had converted into a recreation room with a pool table and a television that still played VHS tapes. It was too much house for one woman. Every real estate agent in the neighborhood told her to sell. The property value had tripled since they bought it. Ruth did not sell. Ruth turned the house into a home for teenage girls aging out of foster care. Girls between 16 and 19 who had nowhere to go. Girls who had been in the system since they were small and were about to be released into the world with a garbage bag of clothes and a list of phone numbers that nobody answered. Ruth called it the Sycamore House. She registered it as a nonprofit. She funded it with her savings, George's life insurance, and small donations from the church down the street. She took in 2 girls the first year, then 3, then 4. Now she had 6. 6 girls, 6 beds, 6 lives she had stitched together with meals and rules and patience, and a kind of love that did not announce itself, but simply showed up every morning at 5:30 when Ruth started making breakfast. Now, let me tell you about these girls, because without understanding them, you won't understand what happened on day 3. There was Keisha, 17, tall and angry, with box braids and a voice that could cut glass. Keisha had been in 7 foster homes in 11 years. She didn't trust anyone, and she let you know it. She wore a denim jacket covered in patches she sewed on herself, band logos, protest slogans, a small embroidered sunflower over the heart. She was brilliant at math. She could solve equations in her head faster than most adults could with a calculator. Ruth found this out by accident when she asked Keisha to help with the grocery budget, and Keisha reorganized the entire spreadsheet in 20 minutes. There was Destiny, 16, quiet as a held breath, with large eyes and a body that seemed to be always bracing for impact. Destiny had been removed from a home where she was hurt in ways Ruth never asked about, because Destiny would share when she was ready and not before. Destiny loved to draw. She drew flowers mostly, roses and lilies and daisies with roots that went deep into the paper, roots so detailed and tangled they looked like veins. She taped her drawings to the wall above her bed. 17 drawings in 4 months. A garden growing in a room that used to hold nothing. There was Monique, 18, the oldest, who was leaving in 4 months and was terrified, though she would never admit it. Monique had a sarcastic mouth and a tender heart, and she mothered the younger girls with a fierceness that came from having never been mothered herself. She cooked dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays because Ruth taught her how, standing side by side at the stove, Ruth's hand guiding Monique's hand on the pot handle, the way a dance partner leads without pushing. There was Tamika, 16, who stuttered when she was nervous and sang when she was calm. There was Priya, 17, who had come from a group home that closed 6 months ago and still flinched when doors closed too hard. And there was the youngest, a girl named Birdie, who was 15, thin as a willow branch, with enormous eyes and a gap-toothed smile, who had been at Sycamore House for only 3 weeks and still slept with the light on. Birdie's real name was Bernadette. She called herself Birdie because her mother used to call her that before her mother went to prison when Birdie was 9. Birdie carried a small yellow notebook, not for writing but for pressing flowers. She found them on the ground, on the sidewalk, in the cracks of parking lots. Dead petals, wilted stems, things other people stepped over. She pressed them between the pages and kept them. When Ruth asked her why, Birdie said, "Because just because something is dying doesn't mean it's not beautiful." Ruth had heard a lot of things in 30 years. That sentence stopped her where she stood. But what happened next changed everything. The man arrived on a Monday. His name was Victor Haynes. He was 43 years old, lean, precise, with a narrow face and a hairline that had receded just enough to make him look older than he was. He wore a 3-piece suit, charcoal gray, with a blue tie and shoes so polished they reflected the porch light. He carried a leather briefcase and a clipboard, and he walked with the kind of efficiency that said he had somewhere to be after this, and the place after that, and possibly a place after that too. Victor worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Residential Oversight. His job was to evaluate group homes and determine whether they met state standards for continued operation. He'd been doing it for 11 years. In that time, he had closed 14 homes. He did not enjoy closing them, but he did not lose sleep over it either. The standards existed for a reason. If a home did not meet the standards, the home closed. It was not personal. It was procedure. Victor had received 3 complaints about Sycamore House in the past year. The complaints came from a neighbor named Lloyd Prescott, a retired insurance adjuster who lived 2 houses down and who had objected to the group home from the day it opened. Lloyd Prescott called the county every other month to report noise, traffic, loitering, suspicious activity, and once a complaint about a girl sitting on the front porch too loudly, whatever that meant. The county had investigated twice and found nothing, but the 3rd complaint triggered an automatic review, and that review landed on Victor's clipboard. Victor rang the doorbell at 9 in the morning. Ruth answered the door. She was wearing a blue cotton dress with big pockets. Her flat shoes were slightly scuffed. The house behind her smelled like coffee and toast and something floral that Victor couldn't identify. It was the lavender sachets Ruth placed in every room because Priya said lavender helped her sleep. "Mrs. Achebe?" "It's Ms. Achebe, but you can call me Ruth." "I'm Victor Haynes, Division of Residential Oversight. I'm here to conduct a 7-day operational review of this residence." Ruth looked at him. She looked at the clipboard. She looked at the briefcase. She looked at the polished shoes. "Come in," she said. "I just make coffee." Victor declined the coffee. He sat at the dining room table and opened his briefcase. He explained the review process. 7 days, he would observe operations, interview residents, inspect the facility, review records, and file a report. If the home met state standards, it would receive renewed certification. If it did not, The home would be closed and the residents relocated. Ruth listened without interrupting. Her hands were folded on the table. Her face gave nothing away. "And what standards are you looking for?" she asked. Victor read from the clipboard. Staffing ratios, safety inspections, educational plans, mental health referrals, financial records, nutritional standards, physical plant conditions. Ruth nodded at each item. "All right. You're welcome to look at anything you like. Talk to anyone you like. Eat anything you like if you change your mind about the coffee." Victor did not smile. He opened the first form, and that was only the beginning. Day 1 was inspection. Victor walked through every room. He checked fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide alarms, window locks, emergency exits. He measured the square footage of bedrooms and compared them to the state minimum. He inspected the kitchen. He checked the refrigerator temperature. He tested the hot water. He examined the recreation room in the basement, noting the VHS player, the pool table, and the fact that the ceiling had a water stain in one corner that had been patched but not painted. He wrote everything down. Every crack, every scuff, every loose doorknob and every chipped tile and every ceiling stain. He did not write down the lavender sachets or the flower drawings taped above Destiny's bed, or the grocery budget spreadsheet that Keisha had organized, or the burn mark on the kitchen ceiling that Ruth refused to erase. At the end of day 1, Victor sat at the dining table and reviewed his notes. Ruth brought him a glass of water. He accepted it this time. "Your facility has several maintenance issues that fall below standard," he said. Ruth nodded. "We have a small budget, Mr. Haynes. I fix what I can when I can. The state requires certain conditions to be maintained regardless of budget." "I understand. I'll continue my review tomorrow." He left at 4. Keisha watched him go from the upstairs window. She turned to Monique. "He's going to shut us down." Monique shook her head. "Ruth won't let that happen. Ruth can't stop a man with a clipboard and a tie that tight. But this story is far from over." Day 2 was records. Victor reviewed every file. Educational plans, medical records, case notes, financial statements. Ruth kept everything in a filing cabinet in the office, which was George's old study, a small room with a desk, a bookshelf, and a framed photograph of the house the day they bought it. The same photograph Ruth carried in her pocket, but larger, in a wooden frame George made himself. Victor found gaps. A missing dental referral for Tamika, an educational plan for Priya that was 3 months overdue for review, a financial report that had an arithmetic error on page 4. He noted each one. But he also found things he did not expect. Ruth kept a separate notebook, handwritten in blue ink, for each girl. Not case notes, personal notes. Keisha's favorite meal was spaghetti with meat sauce, and she ate 3 servings every time. Destiny preferred drawing with charcoal, but settled for pencil because charcoal was expensive. Monique wanted to be a nurse. Tamika sang hymns when she was stressed, specifically "His Eye is on the Sparrow," and she sang it best on rainy days. Priya needed 20 minutes alone after school before she could be around people. Birdie pressed flowers. Victor looked at these notebooks for a long time. He did not write anything on the clipboard. At lunchtime, Ruth set a plate in front of him without asking. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. He stared at it. "I didn't ask for lunch." "You didn't ask for the water yesterday either, but you drank it." He ate the grilled cheese. The bread was thick, golden, buttered on both sides. The cheese was sharp cheddar, and it stretched in long threads when he pulled the halves apart. The soup was homemade. He could taste the basil. He did not comment on the food, but he ate every bite. That evening, as Victor was leaving, Birdie was sitting on the porch steps. She had her yellow notebook open on her knees, and she was pressing a small white flower between the pages, smoothing it flat with her thumb. Victor paused at the bottom of the steps. He looked at the flower. "What kind is that?" he asked. Birdie looked up. Her enormous eyes studied him the way children study things they haven't decided about yet. "It's a clover flower. Most people think they're weeds, but they're not. They're just small." Victor looked at the flower. Then he looked at Birdie. Then he walked to his car without saying anything. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Day 3. Victor arrived at 8:30. The house was different. Not physically. The air was different. There was a tension in the rooms, a tightness, the way a house feels when everyone inside it knows something is coming, but nobody will say it out loud. Ruth met him at the door. She was wearing the same blue cotton dress. Her face was calm, but her hands were in her pockets, which Victor had learned meant she was holding something. The peppermint, or the photograph, or just her own fingers, clasped together, holding herself steady. "Something happened last night," Ruth said. "I want you to see it before I explain it." She led him to the dining room. The table had been pushed against the wall. The chairs were arranged in a circle in the center of the room. The 6 girls were sitting in the circle, not talking, waiting. Ruth sat down in the circle. She gestured for Victor to take the empty chair. "Every month we have a circle," Ruth said. "The girls share something. It can be anything. A memory, a fear, a hope. The only rule is that everyone listens and nobody judges." Victor hesitated. This was not on the clipboard. This was not a standard. This was not procedure. He sat down. Ruth looked at the girls. "Last night, Birdie came to me with something she wanted to share. I told her she could share it here, with everyone, if she felt safe. Birdie, whenever you're ready." Birdie was sitting between Keisha and Destiny. She was holding her yellow notebook against her chest. Her feet barely touched the floor. She looked at Ruth. Ruth nodded. Birdie opened the notebook. She turned to a page near the back. She held it up. It was not a pressed flower. It was a letter, written in a child's handwriting, not Birdie's current handwriting, but younger, rounder, the handwriting of a 9-year-old. The paper was creased and faded and had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had become soft, white lines. "I wrote this the day my mom went away," Birdie said. Her voice was small but clear. "I was 9. I wrote it because she told me to write things down when I felt scared. She said if I put the scary things on paper, they couldn't live inside me anymore." The room was silent. Victor's hands were on his knees. He was not holding the clipboard. Birdie read the letter. "Dear Mama, today they took you away and I don't know where you are going. The lady said you did something bad, but I know you are not bad because bad people don't make pancakes in the shape of birds. I am going to live with someone I don't know. I am scared. I don't like the way the house smells. But I found a flower in the yard, and I am going to keep it because you always said flowers grow everywhere, even in places nobody wants them. I am going to be a flower, Mama. I am going to grow even if nobody wants me here. Love, Birdie." Birdie closed the notebook. She pressed it against her chest. The room did not move. Keisha was looking at the floor. Her jaw was clenched. Destiny had tears running silently down her face. Monique had her hand over her mouth. Tamika was rocking slightly in her chair, her lips moving, humming something too quiet to hear. Priya was completely still, her eyes closed. Ruth spoke. "Thank you, Birdie. That was very brave." Then Keisha did something nobody expected. Keisha, who trusted nobody. Keisha, who wore her anger like armor. Keisha looked at Birdie and said, "I have something too." She didn't have a letter. She had a memory. She told the circle about the day she was removed from her 3rd foster home. She was 12. She had been there for 8 months, the longest she had ever stayed anywhere. She had started to believe it was permanent. She had a shelf for her books. She had a hook for her jacket. She had started calling the woman Mom. Then one morning a social worker came to the door and said there had been a complaint and Keisha had to leave. Keisha asked if she could take her books. The social worker said she could take what fit in one bag. Keisha fit 3 books and her jacket. She left the rest. "I never called anyone Mom again," Keisha said, "until Ruth." She didn't look at Ruth when she said it. She looked at the floor. But Ruth heard it. And Ruth pressed her hand to her chest and breathed. Then Destiny shared. Then Monique. Then Tamika, whose stutter disappeared completely when she sang the first verse of "His Eye is on the Sparrow" in a voice so clear and steady that it filled the room like sunlight fills a window. Then Priya, who simply said, "This is the first place I have ever felt safe." If you close it, I don't know where I will go." She was looking at Victor when she said it. Victor Haynes sat in that circle and listened to 6 teenage girls tell him, in their own words, what this house meant. Not the square footage, not the fire extinguisher placement, not the missing dental referral or the ceiling stain or the arithmetic error on page 4.
They told him what it meant to have a door that locked from the inside instead of the outside. They told him what it meant to eat dinner at a table where someone knew your name. They told him what it meant to be 15 and afraid, and have a woman in a blue cotton dress sit beside your bed at 2 in the morning and say, "I'm not going anywhere, baby. Not tonight. Not ever." Victor's clipboard was on the floor beside his chair. His pen was in his pocket. His hands were on his knees and his head was down and his shoulders were shaking. He was crying. Not quietly, not politely. He was crying the way a man cries when something he buried a long time ago gets dug up by a 15-year-old girl with a yellow notebook and a letter from her mother. Ruth did not touch him. She did not comfort him. She let him feel it. Because Ruth understood that some people need to break before they can see clearly. When Victor lifted his head, his eyes were red. His tie was loosened. His composure was gone. "I was in the system," he said. The room went still.
From age 7 to 17. 4 homes. I aged out with a garbage bag and a list of numbers that nobody answered. He paused. He pressed his palms against his eyes. Nobody did this for me. Nobody sat in a circle and asked what I was feeling. Nobody wrote down my favorite meal. Nobody kept a notebook. He looked at Ruth. "How do you do this?" Ruth tilted her head. "Do what?" "Love them this much, when you know they might leave, when you know the state might take them, when you know the funding might run out. How do you keep doing it?" Ruth reached into her pocket. She pulled out the folded photograph of George reaching for the sky. "My husband used to reach for things he couldn't touch," she said. "I asked him once why he did that. He said, 'Because the reaching is the point, Ruth. You don't stop reaching just because you might not get there.' So I reach. Every morning, every meal, every circle, I reach.
And sometimes I catch something, and sometimes I don't. But the reaching is the point."
Victor looked at the photograph. He looked at the 6 girls. He looked at the burn mark on the kitchen ceiling visible through the doorway. He looked at the flower drawings taped above the door where Destiny had started decorating the dining room. He looked at Bertie's yellow notebook pressed against her chest like a shield. He picked up his clipboard. He looked at it for a long time. Then he set it on the table, face down. "I need to make a phone call," he said. He stepped onto the porch. He was out there for 20 minutes. When he came back in, his eyes were still red, but his voice was steady. "I've requested an extension of the review period, 30 days instead of 7. I've also requested that a maintenance grant be issued from the department's emergency fund to address the physical plant issues I identified." Ruth blinked. "A grant?"
"The state has an emergency facilities fund for licensed group homes facing maintenance-related compliance issues. It exists specifically for situations like this. Nobody applies for it because nobody knows about it. I'm going to walk you through the application personally." Keisha, standing in the hallway, whispered to Monique, "Did the clipboard man just help us?" Monique whispered back, "I think the clipboard man just became a person." But the real shock was still coming. The maintenance grant came through in 9 days. $14,000. Enough to fix the ceiling stain, replace the chipped bathroom tiles, repair 2 windows, update the wiring in the basement, and paint the exterior. Victor did not just process the paperwork. He came back on a Saturday in jeans and a plain shirt, and he helped paint. He stood on a ladder with a roller in his hand, and he painted the porch ceiling while Keisha held the ladder and told him his technique was terrible. "You're leaving streaks," she said.
"I've never painted before." "You've never painted before? What kind of childhood did you have?" Victor looked down at her. "The kind where nobody gave me a porch to paint." Keisha went quiet. She held the ladder tighter. She didn't say anything else for a while. Then, very softly, she said, "You're doing fine." Victor painted every Saturday for 3 weeks. He fixed the loose doorknob on the bathroom. He replaced the hot water heater with one he bought himself, not from the grant, from his own money. He told Ruth it was surplus from a closed facility. Ruth knew it wasn't. She accepted it anyway because she understood that some gifts need a cover story to survive the pride of the person giving them. But what Victor didn't know yet was that someone was trying to stop everything he was doing. Lloyd Prescott, the neighbor 2 doors down, learned about the grant. He was furious.
He filed a complaint with the State Inspector General's office, claiming that Victor had a conflict of interest, that he had become personally involved with the facility he was supposed to evaluate, and that his judgment was compromised. An investigator was assigned. A woman named Sandra Cho, 48, by the book, with a reputation for fairness and an absolute intolerance for nonsense. Sandra reviewed the file. She interviewed Victor. She interviewed Ruth. She visited the house. When Sandra sat down in the dining room, the same room where the circle had happened, she looked around. She saw the flower drawings on the wall. She saw the handwritten chore chart on the refrigerator. She saw the photograph of George reaching for the sky, which Ruth had moved from the office to the dining room after the circle because she wanted the girls to see it every day. Sandra interviewed each girl individually. She asked Keisha about the home. Keisha crossed her arms and said, "This is the first place that ever kept me longer than 8 months. If you close it, I will remember your name and I will never forgive you." Sandra wrote something in her notebook. Then she said, "That's the most honest answer I've gotten in 23 years of doing this job." Sandra's report cleared Victor of any conflict of interest. She noted that his actions fell within departmental guidelines for discretionary support, and that the emergency maintenance grant was properly applied. She added one line at the bottom of her report that was not required by protocol, but that she included anyway. It said, "This home is functioning not merely at standard but well above it. The deficiencies identified are cosmetic and financial, not operational. The care provided by Ruth Achebe is exceptional by any measure. It is the recommendation of this office that Sycamore House receive enhanced funding and continued certification without reservation." Lloyd Prescott received a copy of the report. He did not file another complaint. And just when everything seemed settled, something happened that no one saw coming. Bertie's mother, a woman named Loretta, was released from prison. She had served 6 years. She wrote to the state requesting contact with her daughter. The state forwarded the letter to Ruth. Ruth sat with the letter for 2 days. She didn't sleep well either night. She sat on the porch at 5 in the morning, the way she always did, with her coffee, watching the sky change. But this time, she wasn't watching the sky. She was watching the letter in her hands. She brought it to Bertie on a Tuesday afternoon. They sat on Bertie's bed. The 17 flower drawings looked down at them from the wall. Bertie read the letter slowly. Her lips moved with each word. When she finished, she folded the letter and pressed it into her yellow notebook between a dried daisy and a clover blossom. "She wants to see me," Bertie said. "She does. Do I have to?" "No, baby, you don't have to do anything. What if she's different?" "She might be. What if she's the same?" Ruth took Bertie's hand. "Then you will still have this house, and this bed, and these flowers on the wall, and me sitting right here beside you. Nothing changes that. Nothing." Bertie looked at the notebook. She ran her thumb along the spine. "I want to see her," Bertie said. "But can you come with me? I will be right beside you, every second." The visit was arranged for a Saturday at the County Mediation Center. Ruth drove Bertie in her old Honda. Bertie wore a clean dress that Monique had ironed for her. She carried the yellow notebook. She was shaking so hard Ruth could hear her teeth. Loretta was already there. She was thin, drawn, with eyes that looked like Bertie's but older and heavier, and filled with something that was not quite hope and not quite fear, but something in between. She was wearing a gray sweater, and she had her hands clasped in front of her the same way Bertie clasped hers. The same gesture. Mother and daughter, holding invisible things. Bertie stood in the doorway for a long time. Loretta stood across the room. Neither of them moved. Then Bertie opened the yellow notebook. She turned to the page near the back. The letter. The one she had read in the circle. The one she wrote when she was 9. She held it up so her mother could see it. "You told me to write things down when I was scared," Bertie said. "So I did. Loretta read the letter from across the room. Her hand went to her mouth. Her knees buckled, and she sat down in the chair behind her, hard, like she had been pushed. "You kept it," Loretta whispered. "I kept everything," Bertie said. "Every flower, every letter, everything you gave me before you left. I didn't leave you, baby. I know, Mama. I know." Bertie crossed the room. She sat beside her mother. She opened the notebook to the first page and showed her the flowers. Page after page of pressed petals, roses and daisies and clovers and wildflowers and weeds that nobody else would have saved. "I grew, Mama," Bertie said, "just like I told you I would. I grew even when nobody wanted me there. And now I have a house where someone wants me, and flowers on my wall, and people who sit in a circle and listen when I talk." Loretta held her daughter. She held her and rocked her and pressed her face into Bertie's hair and cried the cry of a woman who had spent 6 years imagining this moment and discovering that the real thing was both better and worse than anything she had imagined. Ruth sat in the corner of the room. She didn't interfere. She didn't speak. She just sat there, her hand in her pocket, holding the photograph of George reaching for the sky. Now let me tell you what happened after. Loretta began supervised visits every other Saturday.
She was in a halfway house, working at a warehouse, attending mandated counseling. She was not ready to be a full-time mother. She knew that. But she was reaching. And reaching, as George would have said, was the point. Monique turned 19 in June. She aged out of the system, but she did not leave Sycamore House. Ruth hired her as a part-time house assistant while Monique enrolled in nursing school at the community college. Monique's first day of classes, Ruth packed her lunch in a brown bag with a handwritten note inside. It said, "You are going to save lives, Monique. Start with your own." Monique cried in the parking lot for 5 minutes before walking into the building. Keisha received a scholarship to a math and science magnet program, full tuition. Victor wrote one of the recommendation letters. He wrote, "Keisha Williams is the most intelligent and resilient person I have encountered in 11 years of public service. She does not need saving. She needs to be seen. I am ashamed it took me this long to look." Keisha read the letter and said, "That's the nicest thing a clipboard man has ever written." Tamika started singing at the church down the street, first in the youth choir, then as a soloist. The first time she sang, "His eye is on the sparrow," in front of a congregation, she didn't stutter once. Ruth was in the third row. She held her peppermint in one hand and her photograph in the other, and she closed her eyes and let the music fill the spaces that grief had carved out of her over 8 years. Destiny's flower drawings were noticed by an art teacher at the high school, who entered 3 of them in a county-wide exhibition. Destiny won second place. The winning drawing was a rose with roots so deep they filled the entire bottom half of the page. The roots were tangled and messy and wild and alive. The plaque underneath read, "Where I Come From," by Destiny Morris.
Priya slept through the night for the first time in 2 years on a Tuesday in August. She came downstairs the next morning and said, "Ruth, I didn't wake up once." Ruth set a plate of eggs in front of her and said, "That's because you finally believe the doors are staying closed, baby." Priya ate her eggs and didn't say anything else, but she smiled, and that smile stayed on her face for the rest of the day. Victor Haynes filed his final report on Sycamore House on a Friday afternoon in October, 7 months after he first rang the doorbell. The report was 43 pages long. It recommended full certification, enhanced funding, and designation as a model facility for the state's foster care transition program. He delivered a copy to Ruth in person. He stood on the porch, the one he had painted, and handed her the folder. Ruth took it. She didn't open it. "Thank you, Victor." "Thank you, Ruth." "For what?" Victor looked at the house, the fresh paint, the clean windows, the porch he had stood on 7 months ago with a clipboard and a decision already made in his head. "For not giving up on me," he said. "Everyone else I reviewed, they argued. They begged. They showed me paperwork. You fed me grilled cheese and made me sit in a circle with 6 girls who told me the truth. And the truth changed everything."
Ruth reached into her pocket. She pulled out a wrapped peppermint and held it toward him. "George used to say that the truth is just love with its work clothes on," she said. "It doesn't look pretty, but it gets the job done." Victor took the peppermint. He unwrapped it slowly. He put it in his mouth and stood there on the porch, sucking on a peppermint, looking at a house full of girls who were growing in a place nobody wanted them, reaching for things they couldn't yet touch.
And that December, on Christmas morning, 6 girls and 1 woman and 1 man who used to carry a clipboard sat around a dining room table that smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Ruth had made pancakes. Not in the shape of birds, because that was Loretta's tradition, not hers. Ruth made hers round and thick and golden, the way George liked them, cooked slow on a low flame with the burn mark on the ceiling watching over them all like a small, permanent, beautiful scar. Bertie was sitting between Keisha and Victor. She had her yellow notebook on her lap. She opened it and pressed a small red petal between the pages, a petal from the poinsettia Loretta had brought the day before during her Saturday visit. "Ruth," Bertie said. "Yes, baby?" "I wrote something new. Can I read it?" "Always." Bertie opened to the last page. Her handwriting was older now, steadier. The letters were taller and more certain. She read, "Dear Mama, I am not scared anymore. I live in a house where someone keeps a notebook with my name in it. I have flowers on my wall and people who sit in a circle and listen. I am still a flower, Mama, but now I have roots, and roots mean you're not going anywhere." Nobody spoke. Keisha put her hand on Bertie's shoulder. Destiny wiped her eyes. Monique pressed her fist against her mouth. Tamika hummed. Priya closed her eyes. Victor held his peppermint wrapper in his fist like it was the most valuable thing he owned. Ruth sat at the head of the table, the same seat George used to sit in, and she reached into her pocket and held the photograph of her husband reaching for the sky. She pressed it against her heart. "He would have loved this," she whispered. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was talking to the burn mark on the ceiling. She was talking to the sky George was always reaching for. She was talking to every empty room in this big old house that wasn't empty anymore. He would have loved every single one of you. And outside, on the porch, he painted. The morning light hit the fresh, white railing, and the old sycamore tree in the front yard dropped a leaf that spiraled slowly down and landed on the welcome mat like it had been placed there on purpose. Like the house itself was reaching for something. And finally, after all these years, catching it. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next story.